My husband has been leaving home at 5 a.m. to go to the gym. One morning, I checked his Apple Watch history. He'd never stepped inside one. Instead, he'd been at the same house for 27 days straight. When I knocked on the door, a little girl answered. I remember the way the hallway light flickered that morning. Just once, a thin buzz in the ceiling before the bulb steadied again. It was 5:14 a.m., the time he usually pulled the front door shut behind him. But that day, I was already awake, already standing barefoot on the cold tile, watching the black edge of the doorframe where the draft always slipped through. The air smelled faintly of metal from the heater switching on. I could hear him moving in the bedroom closet, the soft clack of a belt buckle, one cough he didn't bother to cover. I held my breath without meaning to. His footsteps came down the short hallway, steady, nothing unusual about them. He didn't expect me to be up. I almost stepped back into the kitchen to make it look accidental, but I didn't move. When he saw me, he slowed only slightly, enough for me to notice, but not enough for him to acknowledge. "You're up early," he said, reaching for the shoes he kept lined against the wall. His voice was low, careful. "Couldn't sleep?" "Something like that," I told him. My arms were crossed, though I hadn't realized I'd done it. He tied his shoes tighter than usual. One firm pull, then another. No gym bag. He hadn't taken one in weeks. Just his phone in his pocket, the familiar rectangle against the fabric. When he adjusted his jacket, a faint vibration buzzed. He didn't check it. "You don't have to go today," I said. "You could, I don't know. Stay home. Rest." He shook his head. "I missed 2 days last month. If I don't go now, I won't go at all." He smiled, but it didn't reach anything in his face. "I'll be back by 7. He brushed past me, the faint smell of his deodorant mixing with the colder air from the hallway. The door clicked shut without echo. Our building had thick walls. I watched the seam of light under the door shrink as he walked away. What I remember most is the silence after the latch caught. It felt like the whole apartment waited with me, as if everything inside stopped just long enough to listen to the sound of his disappearing footsteps. I don't know why that stayed with me, but it did. The hallway light flickered again, and the buzz lingered. That small, wavering glow is still the first image that returns whenever I think about how all of this began. The Apple Watch thing started almost accidentally. I wasn't snooping, I wasn't even suspicious at first. The watch had been ours. Well, technically his. But I bought it for him 2 years earlier when he was talking about training for his first half marathon. He never did the race, but he kept the watch, set the alarms, logged the steps, or so I thought. That morning, after he left, I stood by the door for a long time before walking back to the bedroom. The sheets were still warm on his side. His watch sat on the nightstand, plugged in. The charger made a faint clicking sound when I unplugged it. I don't know what I intended. Maybe I just wanted to see if he had closed his exercise ring yesterday. He'd been complaining about losing progress. I don't remember the exact thought, just the cold weight of the watch in my hand and the low glow of its screen when I turned it on. The rings were empty. Not low, empty. For 27 days. I scrolled back once, then twice. Same blank rings day after day. No gym entries, no heart rate spikes, no treadmill logs, nothing. For a second, I wondered if he'd just stopped wearing it, but the sleep data was there. The standing reminders. The exact minute he got out of bed every morning and the exact minute he returned home each day. The watch had been on his wrist the whole time, just not tracking any workouts. His location data kicked in next. I didn't know the feature had been turned on. I didn't even remember agreeing to the Find My sharing. But his phone pinged at the same address every day between 5:24 a.m. and 6:59 a.m. A house I didn't recognize. A street name I'd never heard him say. The same small circle on the map, 27 times. I stared at it until the battery warning blinked red. My thumb hovered over the screen, tracing the shape of the route he always took. Straight out of our building, left onto Dakota Street, then a right turn near the creek. That part was normal. He always said the gym was close to the water, but the route kept going another 3 blocks and ended in a suburban cul-de-sac. No commercial buildings, no gym. I don't remember sitting down, but I found myself on the edge of the bed, the watch resting in my palm. The hum of the refrigerator drifted in from the kitchen. Somewhere outside, a truck reversed slowly, its beeping echoing against the building across from ours. I should have called someone, maybe a friend, maybe my sister. But the idea of explaining it felt strange, premature. The data didn't tell a story. Not yet. It was just numbers and maps and empty rings. Maybe he forgot to log his workout. Maybe he was helping someone, doing an errand, going somewhere he didn't want to discuss because it was mundane or embarrassing or personal. Those possibilities existed, and I held on to them. For the next few days, I didn't touch the watch again. The first time I followed him, I told myself it was for clarity. I wanted to see where he was going, not to confront him, just to confirm. A verification exercise, like checking your locks twice before bed. He left at 5:08 a.m. that day, earlier than usual. I waited an entire minute before I slipped my jacket on and grabbed my keys. Outside, the morning air was colder than I expected, sharp against my throat. I kept a block behind him, moving quietly, adjusting my pace to match the echo of his. He didn't look around. He never did. His posture was relaxed, familiar, as though he'd walked that same path so often it had become muscle memory. When he turned onto Willow Court, I felt a pinching sensation under my ribs. The houses were small, closely spaced, yards with trimmed hedges and single porch lights left on overnight. Most windows were still dark. A few cars sat warming in driveways. He stopped near the end of the cul-de-sac, in front of a beige one-story house with a short driveway and a narrow walkway leading to a small, square porch. I stayed partly behind a parked SUV, watching. He didn't knock. He had a key. He unlocked the door, stepped inside, and pulled it shut without looking back. I didn't approach. I just watched the house for a long moment, making note of the number. 4187. The porch light hummed faintly, a white LED glow that flickered every few seconds. Then I turned around and walked home, my hands inside my sleeves, the cold air pushing tears from my eyes though I wasn't crying. Inside our apartment, the clock on the stove read 5:33 a.m. He didn't come home until 6:59, right on schedule. I didn't confront him, not that day. I needed something more tangible than my own observations, something I could point to without question. I spent the next week gathering details, quietly, without altering my routine, without letting anything slip in my behavior. It was strange how easy it was to act normal. Monday, he left at 5:12 a.m. and returned at 7:01 a.m. His route matched the previous days. Tuesday, 5:10 a.m. to 7 a.m. Same address, same pattern. His watch history continued to log 0 workouts. Wednesday, 5:08 a.m. to 7:02 a.m. Again the same. I screenshotted everything: dates, times, maps, sleep cycles, the blank rings. I created a folder on my phone titled Deck Private. I backed it up twice. He noticed none of it. Or if he did, he didn't show it. Every evening he came home with the faint smell of someone else's laundry detergent on his clothes. Something floral, unfamiliar, almost too subtle to mention without sounding paranoid. Once, while folding towels, I found a long, light brown hair on the sleeve of his sweatshirt. Not mine. I placed it in a Ziploc bag without thinking, the same way one might save receipts after a disputed charge. Bureaucracy helped. Process helped. It kept everything factual. Still, none of it prepared me for the knock on the door of that house. It happened on a Thursday, December 14th. The temperature had dropped overnight, and ice clung to the edges of car windows along Willow Court. I waited until he left, 5:11 a.m., then I drove instead of walking. My hands were tense around the steering wheel the entire ride. My heartbeat felt high in my throat, steady but intrusive, like a warning tapping from inside. The street was quiet. A paper delivery truck idled at the corner. The beige house looked the same as every other day. Porch light flickering, curtains drawn. I parked 2 houses away, turned off the engine, and sat there for nearly a minute. Part of me expected to see him come outside again, maybe realize he'd forgotten something, maybe catch sight of my car, but he didn't. When I finally stepped out, the air burned with that early morning cold that feels almost chemical. My shoes crunched lightly on the frost. A dog barked somewhere behind a fence. A window across the street glowed faintly blue from a television left on overnight. The house had a small doormat with a faded pattern. I could see the grain of the wood on the front door where the paint had been scratched near the lock. I raised my hand and knocked gently at first, then once more, firmer. I waited. A sound moved inside. Footsteps. Small ones. Then the click of a latch. The door opened halfway, and a little girl stood there, maybe 5, barefoot, wearing pink pajamas with cartoon animals. Her hair was light brown, messy from sleep. She looked up at me without fear, without hesitation, just mild confusion. "Hi," I said softly, because I didn't know what voice to use. "Is your mom home?" She shook her head. "She's at work." I nodded, though I had no context for what that meant. Then she tilted her head and asked, in a tone so casual it felt rehearsed, "Are you Daddy's other wife?" The cold air tightened around my jaw. She blinked up at me, waiting for an answer. Behind her, I could see part of a living room, a couch with a blanket thrown over it, a coffee mug on the table, a pair of men's running shoes on the floor. He was inside, somewhere nearby, maybe in the kitchen, maybe down the hall. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. The girl frowned, as if I'd broken some rule of conversation. She shifted her weight, gripping the door edge with her small hand. Her nails were painted unevenly with chipped blue polish. "Daddy's here," she said suddenly. Then she turned her head and shouted, "Daddy, someone's here!" My body moved before my mind caught up. I stepped back, then another step. A shadow shifted in the hallway inside the house. I didn't wait to see who it belonged to. I walked quickly back to my car, my breath forming small clouds in the air. My hands shook when I unlocked the door. I glanced once toward the house. The door was still open, The girl's silhouette filled the doorway. A taller figure appeared behind her, only a shape at that distance, but unmistakable in posture. I started the engine. The rearview mirror shook slightly from the vibration of the car. The porch light flickered again, and for a moment the girl's face flashed in that uneven glow. Wide-eyed, curious, unbothered. It stayed with me long after I pulled away from the curb. By the time I reached the main road, my breathing had leveled. But something inside me felt hollow, as if an internal support beam had quietly collapsed without making any sound. That image, the little girl on the doorstep asking me if I was Daddy's other wife, became the point where everything shifted from suspicion to certainty. From that moment on, I stopped looking for coincidences. I started collecting proof. The morning after the encounter with the little girl, the apartment felt different, quieter, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of quiet where every sound seemed to announce itself. The clink of a spoon, the hum of the refrigerator, even the faint settling of the walls sounded deliberate, like the building itself was waiting to see what I'd do next. He came home at his usual time, 6:58 a.m., keys jangling against the doorframe. I heard him before he entered. His footsteps hesitated for a second in the hallway as if he were listening for something inside. I stayed seated at the kitchen table, phone face down, hands wrapped around a mug of tea I'd reheated twice but hadn't touched. He set his keys on the counter. His jacket rustled when he hung it on its usual hook. He moved methodically, but I caught the slight unevenness in his breath. He wasn't out of breath, he was thinking. "Hey," he said eventually, stepping into the kitchen. "Morning." He glanced at the mug in my hands. "You're up early." Again. I nodded. I didn't trust myself to say anything else without sounding off. He walked to the sink, washed his hands longer than usual, then filled a glass of water. He drank it in 2 long gulps, then looked at me over the rim of the glass. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah." He set the glass down. "You sure?" I didn't answer. My thumb brushed the underside of the mug, feeling the cooled ceramic. He waited a long moment before pushing off the counter and heading toward the shower. I listened to the water run, the pipes in the wall vibrating slightly. I stared at the condensation forming on the mug. My heart beat steadily. Not fast, not panicked, just present, like an unwanted metronome. When he came back into the kitchen dressed for work, he kissed the top of my head the way he always did. A small, practiced gesture. It landed on my hair, not on me. "I'll be home a little late," he said, grabbing his keys. "Budget review." "Okay." He lifted the door to catch the sticking hinge, another habit, and left. The latch clicked softly, the same way it did every morning. The quiet after was thick again, pressing. I checked the time. 7:34 a.m. The house on Willow Court would still be warm from the heater. The little girl might still be awake, watching cartoons, and somewhere inside that beige house he might still be leaving signs of his presence. Shoes by the door, a half-empty mug, a jacket draped over a chair. I needed to know more than what I'd seen. I needed information that didn't come from shadows through a window or the offhand question of a child. I needed tangible clarity, so I began documenting. I started a written log in a small spiral notebook, the kind with perforated edges and a cheap cardboard cover. I wrote timestamps, dates, brief notes, nothing emotional, just facts. December 14th, left 5:11 a.m., returned 6:58 a.m. House 4187 Willow Court. Child answered door. December 15th, left 5:12 a.m., returned 7:01 a.m. Behavior normal. Laundry smell persists. December 16th, Saturday, no gym. Stayed home until 10 a.m. Left to get groceries. Returned with only bread, eggs. It felt like building a case file. The act of writing steadied me. I also printed screenshots from his Apple Watch logs. Every empty workout ring, every sleep cycle, every location ping. I placed each sheet in a cheap plastic folder I bought from a stationery aisle 2 blocks away. It was the same type of folder I used in college for group projects. Something about that familiarity helped me stay grounded. I labeled it simply, WC Documentation. On December 18th, a Monday, I took my first procedural step. Something formal, something outside of my apartment walls. I visited the leasing office of our apartment building. Our manager, Ms. Harrington, was a middle-aged woman with a steady voice and a habit of tapping her pen when she listened. She watched me with mild concern as I explained I needed to request access to security footage from the front entrance. "Anything happen?" she asked. "Package stolen? Someone bother you?" "Not exactly," I said. I need to confirm something." A routine pattern. She studied me briefly. Then she pulled a form from a drawer. "You'll need to complete this," she said, sliding the paper across the desk. "It's a request form. They take a few days to process." I filled out my name, unit number, the date range, and the time window. 5 a.m. to 7:30 a.m. for the past 30 days. My handwriting trembled slightly on 2 of the lines. Not enough for her to comment, but enough for me to notice. I turned in the form. She stamped it with the date, 12/18. "Someone will email you," she said. Probably by Thursday. Thank you. Walking out of the office, I felt a brief sense of control. Small, but real. I needed that. The next morning, December 19th, I didn't follow him. I didn't need to. I watched him leave from the peephole, his silhouette bending slightly as he tied his shoe on the hallway bench before walking toward the elevator. When the elevator doors closed, I turned back toward the apartment and noticed something. His gym clothes were still folded neatly on the chair by the bedroom window, the same pair he used to wear every morning. They hadn't moved in weeks. I added that to the log. After I wrote it, I closed the notebook and sat on the edge of the bed, letting my breathing settle. There was a quiet understanding forming inside me, not emotional, not panicked, just the steady acceptance that a truth had already revealed itself. Now I was following its shape. Around noon, I received an email from the leasing office requesting confirmation of my time frame and a signature for footage release. I filled the PDF electronically and sent it back. Procedures felt safe, predictable. In the afternoon, I bought a binder, 3-ring, black, simple. I hole-punched the printed screenshots and placed them inside. The folder went into the binder as well. I labeled the spine, deck, observations. I didn't cry while doing any of it. Something shifted on December 20th. He came home from work around 6:40 p.m., carrying a paper bag with takeout. He set it on the counter and leaned against the edge of the sink for a moment before speaking. "Can we talk?" he asked. The phrase wasn't unusual, but the tone was. Softer, almost testing. "Sure," I said, closing my laptop. He sat across from me. His posture was tense in ways he probably didn't notice. Shoulders raised slightly, fingers tapping the bag. "I feel like you've been distant," he said. "Not upset, just somewhere else." I kept my face still. "I've had a lot on my mind." "I can tell. Is it work? Your sister? Something here at home?" My eyes flicked briefly to his hands. No ring. He'd stopped wearing his wedding band in October, saying it irritated his skin. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. "Just things," I said. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Are we okay?" The question landed heavily. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because he asked it with genuine uncertainty. For the first time in weeks, I saw something like discomfort flicker through his expression, a hairline crack in whatever routine he'd built. "Yes," I said calmly. "We're okay." He relaxed slightly. "Good. I don't want anything between us." The irony tightened something in my chest. I forced a small nod. He opened the takeout containers. The steam fogged his glasses slightly. He wiped them with the hem of his shirt. "You should eat," he said. "You look tired." I picked up my fork and took one bite to satisfy the gesture. He didn't probe further. We finished the meal mostly in silence, except for the soft sound of plastic lids being removed and the scrape of utensils. Later, when he went to shower, I added that conversation to my log. Not because I needed it for evidence, but because I wanted to understand the psychology of it. How someone could sit across from me, ask about our marriage, and never once mention a second household he was visiting before dawn every day. I wrote Deck 20, asked if we're okay. Seemed nervous. Ring still missing. The water stopped running. I closed the notebook and slid it back into the drawer. December 21st, the leasing office emailed me the footage, a downloadable link. Password protected. The message read, "Please note, footage is limited to building entryway, hallway, and exterior camera facing parking lot." I clicked the link. The video opened in a grid, 3 angles, each time-stamped. I watched the footage from December 1st first, then December 2nd, then 3rd, all the way through December 17th. Every morning looked the same. 5:09, 5:11, 5:08, 5:10. He exited the apartment, walked down the hallway, pressed the elevator button, and waited with his hands in his pockets. When the elevator arrived, he stepped inside without glancing toward the camera. The exterior footage showed him walking across the lot toward his car. His gait was steady. No gym bag, no workout gear. Just the same jacket and the same purposeful steps. I saved each clip to a folder titled Entry Footage, Deck. Then I printed the email from the leasing office and added it to the binder. I sat on the couch for a long time afterward thinking. The binder lay next to me, its black spine catching the soft lamplight. I rested my palm on it. It felt heavier than it really was. I had enough to form a coherent picture, but I still didn't understand the structure of what he was part of, who the woman was, what kind of life existed inside that beige house, and why a child who looked no older than 5 would casually ask if I was Daddy's other wife. There were gaps, large ones, but they were filling in. With each day, the intensity tightened around the facts, the way a wire slowly pulled taut. December 22nd was the day everything accelerated. He left at 5:10 a.m., as usual. The door clicked softly, his footsteps receded. I watched from the window as he pulled out of the parking lot. This time I waited only 30 seconds before I grabbed my jacket and keys. I didn't follow him to confront him. I followed because something had shifted in me. I needed to see the house again, not from a distance. Not as a vague shape at dawn. I needed to see the routine with my own eyes. I drove behind him at a careful distance. He turned onto the same streets as always, his brake lights glowing faint red in the dim morning. He parked in front of 4187 Willow Court and walked up the pathway, head slightly lowered. He had a key, and he let himself in without knocking. I watched him disappear inside. The porch light flickered, a lamp switched on behind the curtains. A warm, soft yellow glow. I waited 5 minutes, then 10. My fingers drummed lightly against the steering wheel. At exactly 5:26 a.m., I saw movement through the edge of the window. A woman's silhouette crossing the room. She carried something, maybe a mug, maybe a bowl. She set it on a table and walked back toward the hallway. I didn't recognize her outline, but she moved with the instinctive familiarity of someone in their own home. Not a stranger, not a short-term connection, someone established. The cold deepened around me, but I barely felt it. I stayed there another 15 minutes, watching, listening to the ticking of my car's interior clock. At 5:43 a.m., the same little girl from before shuffled into view, holding a stuffed animal. She climbed onto the couch and curled under a blanket. Her hair was messy again, sticking up in uneven tufts. A moment later, he entered the living room. He wore the same jacket he'd left the apartment with. He sat next to the little girl, pulled the blanket over her feet, and ruffled her hair gently. Then he stood, lifted her into his arms, and carried her down the hallway. Not awkwardly. Not like someone unfamiliar with a child's weight. He held her the way a father holds his daughter, steady, comfortable, practiced. I felt something inside me go still, not collapse, not shatter, just still. I waited until 6:58 a.m., when his silhouette reappeared at the front door. He stepped outside, locked the door from the outside, and walked to his car. He drove away, heading back to our apartment. I stayed parked for another minute before driving home by a different route. When I entered our apartment, the air smelled faintly of the coffee pot he must have turned on before leaving. His shoes were by the door. His keys were on the counter. The routine was intact. He stepped out of the shower, toweling his hair, and smiled. "Morning," he said. I nodded. "Morning." He didn't know I had watched him. He didn't know the binder on the closet shelf had grown thicker. He didn't know that the quiet acceptance I'd been living in had finally sharpened into something more fixed, more defined. I dried the dishes he left in the sink. I made the bed. I took notes in my log with a calm hand. The wire had tightened fully now, tension with nowhere left to go but inward. The next step wasn't emotional confrontation. It was procedure. The day after that, December 23rd, I called a non-emergency line at the police department, not to file a report, but to ask general questions. I spoke to a woman with a measured, steady voice. She sounded like she had handled far more complicated calls than mine. I asked about verifying residency, family situations involving minors, procedures for documenting suspected deception involving multiple households. She pointed me towards specific forms, public records, and a department email where I could ask further questions. She repeated twice that she couldn't give legal advice, only procedural guidance. I thanked her. I wrote down everything she said. Then I went to the library. I used the public terminals to search property ownership records for 4187 Willow Court. The house was owned by a woman named Elena Merriweather. Not a name I recognized, not someone he had ever mentioned. She had owned the house for 6 years. There was no record of my husband's name attached to the property. But public records showed something else. Elena had a daughter born in late 2016. The age matched the girl at the door almost exactly. I wrote this in my notebook, then photocopied the property record for my binder. I didn't know yet whether Elena and my husband were legally connected. Marriage records weren't part of the database I could access at the library, but the presence of his toothbrush in their bathroom, his jacket on her chair, his morning routines in her living room, those weren't public records. Those were behavioral facts, domestic details, patterns. By the time I got home, the sun had set, and the streetlights had already switched on. Our apartment was quiet. He was in the living room watching a crime documentary, volume low, lights dim. I could smell the faint scent of her laundry detergent still clinging to his jacket on the hook. I sat beside him on the couch and watched the screen for a minute. On the show, detectives were sorting through files, matching dates, connecting fragments of evidence. The parallel wasn't lost on me, even then. He rested his hand on my knee, not affectionately, just out of habit, as one might place an object back in its familiar spot. I didn't move. Inside me, something was aligning, piece by piece, like the static settling in a completed signal. I didn't know the final form yet, but I knew the next step would lead there, and it would come soon, very soon. On Christmas Eve morning, he left at 5:09 a.m. The hallway outside our apartment smelled faintly of pine cleaner. A neighbor on the third floor had been baking late the night before. The sweet leftover warmth still lingered on the landing. I watched him through the peephole as he tied his shoe on the bench and adjusted his jacket collar. His movements were slower than usual, more deliberate. Maybe he was tired. Maybe he sensed something shifting. He pressed the elevator button and stepped inside without looking back. The moment the doors closed, I exhaled. I hadn't realized how long I'd been holding my breath. This time, I didn't follow him. I sat at the kitchen table with the binder open, its pages spread in careful layers. Screenshots, timestamps, photographs of the house on Willow Court taken from a distance, printouts of public records, the handwritten log. The binder had become its own object, something solid, almost clinical. I rested my hand on the cover for a moment before closing it. That morning, instead of tracking him, I drove to the county records office. The building was cold inside, fluorescent lights, scuffed tile floors, a faint smell of old paper. A clerk behind a glass window asked if I needed help. Her name tag read Nora, and she wore a holiday pin shaped like a snowflake. "I need to check marital records," I said, "for someone I believe may be using a secondary address." She nodded, sliding a form under the glass. "Name and date of birth. There's a small fee for copies." I filled out his information, my husband's name, his date of birth, our marriage date. I hesitated only once before writing the address I suspected might reveal something. 4187 Willow Court. Nora typed quietly, her fingernails tapping the keys softly. The search took long enough for me to study the pattern of scratches on the countertop. Finally, she looked up. "I can confirm there's no marriage license listed for him in this county besides yours." She paused slightly. "However, there was a certificate filed 2 years ago listing him as a witness on a birth record." My throat tightened. "Birth record?" I asked. "Yes." She printed a copy and slid it under the glass. "The mother's name is listed as Elena Merriweather. The child's surname matches hers." The paper vibrated slightly under my fingers as I picked it up. The certificate didn't list the father's name, just "not provided." But in the witness field, under attestation, my husband's name appeared clearly. His signature was there too. Small, controlled, unmistakable. He had been present at the child's birth, not as an emergency visitor, not as a neighbor, as a signatory. Something inside me settled into a quieter, colder understanding. This wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't infidelity in the casual sense. It wasn't a temporary arrangement he'd slipped into. It was a structure, a life, a second existence built carefully, probably slowly, likely for years. I folded the document, placed it inside the binder, and thanked Nora. She gave me a sympathetic look she likely gave dozens of people that week, people searching for answers in public databases. When I stepped outside, the winter air felt sharper than earlier, as if the cold had become more pointed. I sat in my car with the engine off for a long moment, letting the heater's residual warmth fade, letting the silence settle inside the small space. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink heavily. My body felt steady, almost overly so, as if some internal balancing mechanism had activated to compensate. I placed the binder on the passenger seat and drove home. When I walked through the apartment door, the first thing I noticed was the quiet humming of the heater. It clicked on and off rhythmically. His shoes were still by the door. The faint aroma of the coffee he'd brewed lingered in the kitchen air. I set the binder on the table. At 6:58 a.m., right on schedule, I heard his key in the lock. He entered calmly, brushing snow from his shoulders. He didn't notice the binder at first. He hung his jacket, set his keys down, and stretched his neck the way he always did. "Morning," he said, shaking off the cold. "Morning." He stepped into the kitchen and froze mid-step when he saw the binder open on the table. In that moment, something subtle shifted in his stance. His shoulders drew inward half an inch. His breath paused. His eyes narrowed in a way that wasn't anger, but calculation. "What's this?" he asked, voice low. "Documentation," I said, keeping my voice even. "For clarity." He glanced at a page, the printout of the property record for 41-87 Willow Court, then the Apple Watch logs, then the notes. His jaw tightened. "You've been following me?" he said. "I've been verifying," I replied. The difference mattered. He exhaled slowly, leaning against the counter. His fingers tapped once, twice. A familiar rhythm. "Okay," he said finally. "I want to explain." I nodded, waiting. The heater clicked off. The silence around us pressed in. He rubbed his forehead. "It's not what you think." "What do I think?" "That I'm living some double life. That there's some secret family. That I'm lying to you." He swallowed. "I'm not." I didn't respond. I kept my breathing steady. He continued. "I go there to help. Elena needs support. She's been going through things. And the kid. She's not mine." I waited. The stillness in the room felt heavy, like the air itself was bracing. "She's not mine," he repeated. "I was just there, at the hospital. It's complicated." "Complicated how?" He hesitated. His eyes darted briefly toward the door, almost imperceptibly. A movement most people would miss. I didn't miss it. "She was my friend," he said. "Before you and I met. I told you that. You never mentioned a child. She asked me not to. It wasn't my story to tell. I kept silent. letting the words settle between us like dust. He stepped closer. I know how this looks, but nothing happened between us. I swear. I'm helping her with mornings, with school. She works nights. I'm just filling in. Every day, I said quietly. For 27 days straight. His jaw tightened again. She needed consistency. I lifted my gaze slowly. Why did her daughter call me Daddy's other wife? He blinked. Once. Then again. Slower. I don't know, he said. Kids say strange things. Kids repeat what they hear. His hands curled slightly at his sides. I opened the binder to the birth certificate. His signature. The date. What were you attesting to? I asked. If she's not your daughter? He stared at the document for a long time, and something in his face, not guilt, but calculation, shifted. Then he said nothing. The heater clicked back on. The sound was louder in the silence. He turned away first. I need to take a shower, he said quietly. We can talk after. He walked down the hall without looking back. I stayed at the table, listening to the sound of the water turning on, hearing the pipes in the wall vibrate. His reaction told me more than the documents ever could. Not denial, not outrage, not confusion. He was managing the conversation, calibrating, adjusting, the kind of behavior someone uses when they're trying to preserve two separate realities at once. I left the apartment while he was still showering. I didn't slam the door. I didn't even close it loudly. I just stepped out, took the stairs instead of the elevator, and walked to my car. I drove to the police department. The front desk officer, a middle-aged man with silver hair and a measured manner, asked how he could help. I explained calmly that I needed to speak with someone about documentation related to a potential domestic deception issue involving minors and multiple households. He nodded once and told me to wait. A woman in a dark blue uniform stepped into the waiting area. She introduced herself as Officer Marlowe. Her voice was steady, unhurried. We sat in a small interview room with a metal table and a faint scent of cleaning chemicals. I placed the binder on the table. She opened it carefully, scanning the pages. Every so often, she'd ask, "When was this captured?" Or, "How did you obtain this?" I answered directly, with timestamps and dates. After reviewing everything, she asked gently, "What outcome are you seeking right now?" "Clarity," I said. "Next steps. What's appropriate? What's within procedure?" She nodded. "You've documented thoroughly. You've kept everything factual. That's good." She tapped the birth certificate page lightly. "We can't make assumptions about paternity without legal confirmation, but you've identified potential concerns." I nodded slowly. My fingers rested lightly on the binder. Her voice stayed even. "I'm going to give you a case number. It doesn't mean an accusation has been made. It's just an official way for you to continue documenting. If anything escalates, or if you gain new information, you contact us." She wrote the number on a small card. Case 24-0671. She slid it toward me. "If you need to talk to someone in our domestic support division, they're available 3 days a week." I thanked her. She handed the binder back to me with both hands, as if acknowledging the weight of what it held. When I stepped outside, the cold hit my face sharply. The sky was pale gray, low clouds moving slowly, like the day itself was holding its breath. I sat in my car and rested my head against the steering wheel for a moment, not crying, just steadying myself. Then I drove home. When I re-entered the apartment, the shower had stopped. He stood in the hallway, hair wet, towel around his shoulders, phone in his hand. He froze when he saw me. "Where did you go?" he asked, not panicked but controlled. "Out," I said. I hung my coat on the hook. He studied me for a moment. The atmosphere in the room had changed. He sensed it. "You left your phone here," he said quietly. "I know." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Why?" "I didn't want to be tracked." The sentence hung in the air between us, cold and matter-of-fact. His posture shifted again, minutely. Shoulders tightening, chest rising slightly with a longer breath. He opened his mouth, closed it, then walked into the kitchen slowly, as if calibrating each step. He pulled out a chair and sat across from me. "If you think I'm some kind of threat," he said evenly, "you're wrong." I didn't respond. "And if you went somewhere to start something legal," he paused, choosing words, "you should know that misunderstandings can look worse on paper." I watched him quietly. He continued, "I'm offering to explain, completely, today, if you want." "I went to the police," I said calmly. His fingers tightened around the edge of the chair. "Not to accuse you," I added. "To document. For my safety. For clarity." He leaned back slowly, exhaling through his nose. Not angrily, strategically. "I see," he said. The clock on the stove clicked as it switched minutes. He looked at me with a steady, unreadable expression. Then, without another word, he rose, walked to the bedroom, and closed the door. I listened to the soft thud of his dresser drawer opening, the unmistakable sound of items being placed into a bag, keys jingling, a zipper pulled. I didn't move. After several minutes, he stepped back into the hallway carrying a small duffel. He didn't look at me. "I'm going to stay at a friend's tonight," he said quietly. I nodded. He walked to the door, opened it, paused for only a fraction of a second, then left. The door clicked shut behind him. The same soft click I had heard every morning. Only this time, the silence that followed didn't press in. It expanded. The apartment exhaled with me. He didn't return on Christmas Eve. He didn't return on Christmas Day. On December 26th, I received an email from him that contained only 2 sentences. I think some space is good right now. We'll talk later. There was no apology, no explanation, no denial, just distance. Clean, controlled distance. I responded with a single line. Please communicate through written messages only. That was the last time we exchanged words directly. In the days that followed, I changed the locks. The management office processed it without question. The case number I provided was enough. I boxed his remaining belongings, labeling each box with simple descriptions. Clothes, toiletries, miscellaneous. I placed them neatly in the hall closet. I emailed Officer Marlowe a final update confirming that he had moved out voluntarily. She replied with a short acknowledgement and reminded me that the case number remained active should I need anything else. The binder stayed intact, stored on the highest shelf in the hallway. Accessible, but no longer something I needed to touch daily. The apartment felt different, but not empty. The routines returned. The sound of the kettle in the morning, the creak of the window frame when the heater kicked on, the quiet of the early hours before the city woke. But the story wasn't finished yet. On January 2nd, I received a phone call from an unfamiliar number. I let it go to voicemail. When I listened to the message, a woman's voice, calm, measured, introduced herself as a representative from a mortgage servicing company I didn't recognize. She asked me to return the call at my earliest convenience regarding an account under review. I called back from my kitchen table, pen ready, notebook open. The representative confirmed my name, then asked if I was aware of a mortgage account opened in my name 2 years prior. I told her I was not. She provided the property address, 401 Hernate 7 Willow Court. My throat tightened. She explained that I was listed as a co-signer on the mortgage. My social security number, employment information, and income verification had all been submitted as part of the application. The account had been in good standing, payments made on time, no issues flagged, until now. I asked her to send me copies of the application and closing documents. She agreed. Within an hour, I had a PDF in my inbox. I opened it. There, on the 3rd page, was my name, my signature, or something close enough to pass. My social security number, my employment details from 2 years earlier, when I'd worked at a different company. The co-borrower was Elena Merriweather. A secondary contact field listed my husband as property manager, responsible party. I printed the entire document. My hands were steady, but my pulse felt loud in my ears. He hadn't just built a second life, he had tied me to it. Legally, financially, without my knowledge or consent. I had co-signed a mortgage I'd never seen. I was financially responsible for a house I'd never lived in. My credit, my identity, my name, all woven into the structure of his deception. I sat at the table for a long time, staring at the signature that wasn't quite mine. Then I called the fraud department. The next few days blurred into a sequence of calls, emails, forms, and affidavits. I filed an identity theft report with the Federal Trade Commission. I placed fraud alerts on my credit files with all 3 major bureaus. I froze my accounts. I contacted the mortgage lender's fraud investigation team and submitted copies of the forged documents. I called Officer Marlowe and updated the case file. She noted the new information and mentioned that the case could potentially be reclassified to include financial fraud and identity theft. I also received another unexpected call, this time from a pediatric clinic. The receptionist asked if I could confirm pickup arrangements for a child at the Willow Court address. She referred to me as the child's alternate guardian. I told her I was not a guardian of any kind and had never authorized my name to be used in that capacity. She sounded confused but apologetic. She said my name and contact information appeared on their emergency contact form, submitted by the mother approximately 18 months earlier. I asked her to remove my information immediately and to send me written confirmation. She agreed. When I hung up, I realized the scope of what had been done. Not only had he used my identity to secure a mortgage, he had also embedded me into the administrative infrastructure of that household. School records, medical records, emergency contacts. On paper, I was tied to a child I had never met, in a life I had never lived. The web was tighter than I'd imagined, but I wasn't trapped in it anymore. I was dismantling it, thread by thread. By mid-January, I had compiled a second binder. This one was labeled Identity Theft, Fraud Documentation. It contained copies of the forged mortgage application, FTC Identity Theft Affidavit, Credit Bureau Fraud Alerts, correspondence with the mortgage lender's fraud team, letters to the pediatric clinic and school district police case updates. A timeline of discovery. I met with a family law attorney recommended by the legal aid clinic. She reviewed both binders and confirmed that I had grounds for legal separation, potential civil action for fraud, and a strong case for identity theft prosecution if I chose to pursue it. She also mentioned that the mortgage lender's investigation could result in the loan being voided or restructured, removing my name from the obligation entirely. For the first time in weeks, I felt a measure of relief. The systems I had engaged, legal, financial, institutional, were responding. Slowly, procedurally, but responding. In late January, I received a letter from the mortgage company. After their internal investigation, they had determined that my signature on the mortgage application was likely forged. They were initiating a full review of the loan and would be contacting me within 30 days with a resolution plan. I filed the letter in the binder. That same week, I received a formal notice that the police case had been updated to include suspected identity fraud and forgery. An investigator would be in touch if they needed additional information. I added that notice to the binder as well. On February 3rd, I sat at my kitchen table with both binders in front of me. The apartment was quiet. The heater hummed softly. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn. I flipped through the pages slowly. Screenshots, logs, property records, birth certificates, forged signatures, fraud alerts, case numbers. It was all there. The entire architecture of deception, documented and dismantled. I closed the binders and placed them side by side on the table. Then I stood, walked to the storage closet, and pulled out a cardboard box. I placed both binders inside, along with a few other documents from this period: the police case card, the attorney's business card, the final email from the mortgage company. I taped the box shut and wrote on the outside, 2024, legal, personal records. I carried the box to the highest shelf in the closet and set it down. Then I locked the closet door. The small mechanical sound of the key turning and the latch engaging felt final. The apartment settled into a new rhythm after that. I rearranged the furniture. I bought new curtains. I replaced the hallway light fixture, the one that used to flicker. The new light was steady, bright, and didn't hum. I started cooking for one again. I filled the fridge with things I liked. I slept on whichever side of the bed I wanted. The silence was no longer heavy. It was just mine. In early March, I received a final letter from the mortgage company. After completing their investigation, they had determined that the loan was obtained through fraudulent means. My name had been removed from the account. The loan had been restructured under Elena Merriweather's name alone, with adjusted terms to reflect the change in co-signer status. I was no longer financially responsible for the house on Willow Court. I filed the letter in a small folder labeled Closed, 2024, and placed it in my desk drawer. That evening, I stood in the kitchen and made tea. The kettle whistled softly. Steam curled upward in the low light. I poured the water slowly, watching the color bloom through the clear mug. I carried it to the window and looked out over the city. The streetlights were just beginning to turn on. The sky was pale blue, fading into gray. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the faint sound of traffic, the hum of the city waking up. I took a slow breath. For the first time in months, I felt steady. Not happy, not relieved, just steady. The kind of quiet that comes after a long storm, when the air finally clears and you realize you're still standing. Sometimes healing isn't loud. Sometimes it's just the sound of paperwork settling, the hum of the heater, the steady rhythm of your own footsteps returning to a familiar floor, and the quiet, final understanding that one life has ended and another is beginning in its place. The hallway light doesn't flicker anymore, but I still notice it every morning. The way it comes on cleanly, without hesitation, without that thin, unstable buzz. And I think, this is what stability looks like. Not dramatic, not triumphant, just steady, just mine.